Podium Audio presents.
What an intro. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to TBRCon2024. I am so excited for this panel titled The Rise of the Novellas. We have an amazing panel here today. I'll be your moderator, Moses Ose Utomi. I'm the author of Lies of the Ajungo and the forthcoming The Truth of Djèlí. And let's have everyone introduce themselves. Yeah, we'll start with, anybody want to volunteer? Start with, Veronica looks ready.
What? No, why? I will go. I'm Veronica. I'm Veronica Roth. I'm probably best known for writing Divergent, which was a YA dystopia of many years ago. But recently, I've been writing adult sci-fi and fantasy and novellas. So I wrote a far future retelling of the Greek tragedy Antigone called Arch-Conspirator, and in May I tapped into some Polish roots and wrote a sort of Polish contemporary fantasy novella called When Among Crows.
Nice. Malka?
Hi, I'm Malka Older. I'm the author of Infomocracy and the rest of the Centenal Cycle trilogy, and also most recently, The Mimicking of Known Successes, which is a novella. And its sequel, The Imposition of Unnecessary Obstacles, comes out in just over 2 weeks.
Congrats.
Thanks.
Yes,
Thank
congratulations.
you. Fenderson, do you want to go next?
Hello, everybody. Fenderson Djèlí Clark, or P. Djèlí Clark. I'm the author of the novellas Ring Shout, The Haunting of Tramcar 015, and I can't remember the other one. Oh, Black God's Drums, and my most recent novella, and this is Nia, who is here.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm happy there's one twin, and one is somewhere else. And my most recent novella will be The Dead Cattail Assassins, which comes out sometime in 2024. That's the best I can say.
Nice. It's a good problem to have so many novellas that you can't forget. That's a good position to be in. Martha.
Hi, I'm Martha Wells. I'm the author of the Murderbot Diaries, a lot of which are novellas, and the books of the Raksura and a bunch of other stuff. Most recently, this year, I had Witch King come out, which is a fantasy novel. Then I had City of Bones, which is part of Tom is re-releasing my backlist in the author's preferred editions. That's the first one of that. The next one's coming out February 27th, the Book of Ile-Rien, which is a combination of the Element of Fire and the Death of the Necromancer. And then System Collapse, the most recent Murderbot Diaries novel, came out in November, this past November.
Thank you. And Beth.
Hi, I'm Beth Tabler. I'm not a writer, but I'm the editor of Grimdark Magazine's periodicals magazines. I'm also the head editor of Before We Go blog, where we do a lot of reviewing, and there's quite a lot of Before We Go people in the comments so far saying hello.
Shout out to the Before We Go crew.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to it. The first question, and the start of any panel is, in this case, what makes a good novella? Your ideas of how it's constructed or what characteristics, especially when thinking about how it's different from novel or short story. Does anybody want to start us off there?
I can start. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
To me, it's just the thing that makes it different for me as a writer is the pacing, how fast or how slow the pacing has to go. I've been writing novellas where I've realized the first couple of times I tried it, it was going too fast to be a novella even, and I needed to, for the length I wanted, and I needed to adjust it. and then realizing it's going too slow and it's not going to be a novella, it's actually going to be a novel. So the pacing is I think, probably the most important part for me. I like the fact that you can be more concentrated in the novella in your storytelling. It's not necessary to make a story epic, a fantasy story epic length. I think they're really good for fantasy that's just concentrated on like one incident of one particular story, as opposed to what you usually have to do with a fantasy novel is give it more of a broader field or feel. I think that, though, I think nowadays we're seeing a lot of fantasy in a lot of different forms, and it's really kind of opened up the genre to different methods of storytelling. That's about it.
Yeah, anyone could chime in. I think I saw Malka raise her hand.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, okay, I think I should make a disclaimer at this point that I am kind of like, I honestly really love chunky, huge books. Like, I love to see.
How dare you?
I have a ton of time to get into this and enjoy it, and it's not over yet. Yes. So I'm just going to put that out there as like a given to start with. But that said, you know, I'm actually rereading the Murderbots right now to get up to System Collapse, and you know, the feeling at the end of the first one, particularly, although also some of the later ones, but the feeling that you get at the end of a novella when you're like, it just hits completion and closes, and it's so self-contained, and you know, it's very much like a really good short story, except you know, there's more, which, as I said, I usually like. So I do think that there's something about the novellas that really hit, as Martha said, that pacing right, and have, you know, feel very complete and feel like you get really a story with, you know, characters and subplots and some world building, and you get all of that, and it doesn't feel rushed and it doesn't feel skimped, and it's done. Like, it's an amazing feeling actually when it turns out right like that. So, you know, I think there's a ton to be said for that. And there are, even though I like long books, every once in a while there's a time when you just want to read something short and finish it, you know, very late that same night or whatever. So yeah, I think there's some really great things to be said about really good novellas.
I think novellas have to be incredibly lean and very purposeful. You know, that you can't have extraneous detail. I mean, you got to be able to tell your story as lean and sharply as possible because you have very little time to do it. And so the best novellas are the ones that kind of punch you in the face and, you know, don't dance around with details.
Yeah, I think the best ones that I've read have really kind of made use of every moment to do some kind of world building or character development or whatever. There's just not a lot of wasted space. And obviously, like, when you write a novel, you're not trying to waste space. That's not, but it's just that the story might have like a larger, I don't know, we'll probably get into this when we talk about actually writing them, but I had a professor in college who really emphasized like just knowing the size of an idea when you have it. And you know how to do that. And sometimes you're wrong, you know, that's okay. But I've been wrong a couple times thinking I was writing a novella and then it was like, oh no, surprise. But it's just like, there's like an extra whole like middle section in a novella or in a novel that kind of is cut out from a novella. That makes it sound like it's maybe incomplete, but that's not what I mean. It's just that like the arc is a little shorter. Yeah, that sounds obvious, but I don't know. I do love that they offer some space for really making a world feel lived in and large. And you can, as we see with Murderbot, you can kind of, sorry, Martha, we're just going to refer to you all panel, all of us, probably. But anyway, you get a sense of like the larger universe over time. But each one does not have to accomplish as many things as a novel, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point.
No, I think I agree with everything everyone said. I mean, novellas have to be economical in their world building. They have to be lean. They have to be people who want to read a novel on their commute. But they don't want to be reading it for days, even though I agree with Malka. I love long, chunky books. I was actually one of the first few people who were like, the Malazan books are over. Can't we have more? Wheel of Time is over, and can we have a few more books? I like
Oh no.
Fourth Stopper poems. But I also like, a good novella that gives me something short and sweet that I can finish sometimes in a day, sometimes in a commute, and I can feel that I got to know the characters well. I always joke and say that for a short story, my characters, you may never figure out where they live. For the novella, you might visit their home, but you can't stay long. Whereas the novel, you might have to go there several times and so forth. And so I like that short ability to give me a bit of world building, a larger plot, larger stakes at times, that a novella can provide. And I think the best thing that you can get from a novella, and I get this from, if you ever get this from readers, is they say, my biggest critique is that it's over so soon. That's a perfect novella then, right? Or that they want more. And it was like, oh, that's your critique, then did my job. So yeah, I think that makes a great novella.
Yeah, it's funny to look through Goodreads reviews and it's like 1 star, left me wanting more at the end. I didn't get enough. And it's like 5 stars, left me wanting more at the end. Can't wait for more.
Yeah. Sorry.
I already have some questions in the audience. Just for the audience knows, we'll be doing Q&A at the end, so we'll get to those, but keep asking. For the panel, let's take a look at, Veronica, you kind of mentioned it. What's it like writing a novella, and how is that different? I think yeah, everyone here is written in different forms. So like, yeah, what is it? How does a novella feel distinct from the other ones?
Well, since I brought this up, I can go first.
Sure,
but
yeah.
to me, it's just about like looking at the idea and trying to determine how large it is. So I wrote my last novel. It's called Poster Girl. It's a dystopian mystery. And it's the tightest novel I've ever written. So, I tend to write long, I feel like a lot of sci-fi fantasy writers write long, maybe just a lot of writers in general. But for me, that one started as a novella. And I just didn't go into all of the different parts of the world that I thought that I had ideas for. And when I expanded it to a novel, that's kind of what I had to do. Because you raise a lot of questions, and then you have to kind of answer them, or at least gesture to them. So I sometimes just kind of feel it out as I go. Like, I think the shape of this will be novella length. But yeah, I think someone mentioned earlier that it's sort of like one arc, or just like a leaner, we've been using the word lean a lot, but I think, yeah, it's just like doesn't have as many rises and falls to me. Yeah, here, everyone else go. Yeah.
I can go. The thing about, I think the middle of a novel is, especially when I was just starting out, it always felt like it lasted so long, because the beginning's very exciting because you're establishing everything. And then the end's very exciting because you're closing everything off and revealing things. In the middle, it's like you're still in setup to a certain extent because you have to set up the ending, but it also feels like you're just like swimming through your morass of ideas and everything, trying to, if this part doesn't come together, the beginning and the ending don't matter almost. And so I always found it a struggle, and I see a lot of people just starting out in trying to write novels, that's the part, and it was for me for the first probably 5 or 6 books. That's the part where I most want to go off and write something else when I'm in the middle. Because the new shiny of starting a beginning again, where I don't have to worry about anything that's happened before, I can just be wildly creative, as Djèlí starts to draw me away. And the thing I think I like about novellas is that middle period is so short. It's like you're almost transitioning from beginning into ending without that, because your story arcs are shorter, or by definition, even their subplots and everything's by definition shorter. So there's less time for you to, as the writer, to get distracted, less time for the reader to get distracted. It's all, it's just that. It's like everything you like about writing a novel in miniature form. And then you have a finished work at the end of it. And it's so exciting.
That's so true. Yeah.
Yeah. I also tend to write long. I also revise long, which is like a whole separate problem. But when I went into writing The Mimicking of Known Successes, I did kind of want to write a novella. I'd written these sprawling books that are still in process somewhere. And I just wanted to write something sort of contained, as I said. And it was actually really nice because the feeling I talked about when you get to the ending of a novella and you're like, oh, that's how I felt when I finished writing it, which was like awesome. Because I was like, I didn't look at word count a lot. I mean, I kind of felt like if it went into a novel, I wasn't going to try to cut it to hit that word length, but it fit, what I had in my head, just it fit. And that is extremely satisfying. And the sequels are getting progressively longer. So I don't know, I'm going to have to kind of come up with another of those ideas that just seems to fit novella if I want to keep doing it. But it's really nice when it works.
Yeah, well, long writers of the world unite. Here we are, people who are overwriters, as I call us, overwriters of the world. So my writing of novellas actually comes out of my overwriting. Long time ago in the galaxy far, far away, when I first decided I wanted to write, I knew nothing about writing. I just had all that zeal and energy back in college that I want to be a writer because I read a lot. I sat down and wrote my first short stories. And my short stories would be like in 30,000 words, done. Right? What did I know about a market and how long short stories should be? I was just writing. And so in some ways, people ask me, how do I get into writing novellas? Sometimes I had ideas. I think like Veronica was saying that I obviously didn't know how big that idea was. And they ended up in novella form a lot. They weren't big enough for novels, but they ended up in that novella area. And so, it's almost instinctual for some reason for me. Some people write really short. I had to train myself how to write shorter stories, right? And how to write actual short stories. And for some reason, I know not why, novellas are my sweet spot. It's where I tend to want to write. And so I wish I could explain it. People want me to have workshops. I don't know. I don't know why it is. That's just how I work. And so it's, writing it has been, I guess when I sit down, I think about techniques, it has to do with, I think what a lot of people are saying, getting a story that doesn't try to give too much, but gives a lot more than what a short story can, right? And so when I think about writing novellas, I try to approach them with the sense of, this isn't a novel. I can't go as in-depth as a novel, but this isn't a short story either. I need to give readers a bit more about the characters, a bit more about the world building. For those of us who are overwriting, we know that world building is like a ton of it. And so, novellas allow me to do so. But it's almost like the one set of writing I have to do without thought. It's like, I'll start off and I was like, yeah, sure enough, it's novelette or novella. And how hard is it to take a novelette into a novella? It's like just a few more words and you're there. So, yeah.
Yeah, there is something. I mean, it sounds like we'll have similar aspects of it, but I'm also interested in the difference in your processes. I know some people are heavy outliners, some people are pantsers or whatever they call it. How does your process differ for writing a novella? Do you have to change certain things? Do you kind of do the same thing on a different scale? What does that look like?
I'll take this one. The only difference I would say for writing a short story to novella or a novel is, for a short story, I'm mostly going to jot down my ideas actually on my phone in that yellow note section, and I will write from there, or I'll jot it down. I call it my little big book of rhymes, a little black book where I just have ideas. When it comes to novellas or novels, because there's more complexity, that's when I open up Scrivener, right? And I put my story really into much more thinking of them in chapter-based outlines and everything else. And yes, I'm not a pantser. There are people who are great at that. They can start in the middle of their novel, or they can do the end. That's like, I can't even conceive that. And so I make outlines, and the biggest difference for me for my process is that if it's as big as a novella or a novel, I need to have it outlined. And I use, okay, you're watching Bluey, but I'm talking here. Okay, you can watch the next Bluey then, right? Bluey, the great short, the Bluey's novella, short story, all like 7 minutes long. Right? So, This is also part of the writing process, as you can see here.
Imagine.
So one of those things again that we will have to do is, here we go. Hold that. You got it. Is I've lost my train of thought because children.
Fenderson, I have a question for you. You wrote a Master of Djinn, which is 400 pages. Did that start as a novella and then just keep going? And it got bigger and bigger, and you had more story to tell? Just out of curiosity.
No, really, that started off with a novelette. Well, it was supposed to be a short story, a Dead Djinn in College. It ended up being a novelette, and I couldn't get it published anywhere, so I put out something on Facebook saying, "Hey, anybody want to publish this?" And Diana Folk from Tor said, "Hey, let me take a look at it." And that's my future. That's my writing history. And so, in that case, that novel came out of people saying, "Hey, I really like that novelette. Do you have more?" And then I wrote a novella. Talking of Tramcar 015. And people said, "Oh, I like that. Do you have more?" And I said, "Okay." And here's a novel. So that was how that came about.
I think you were getting to like the extent of the planning though. And that's a huge difference for me. Like it's not, I outline everything. So even in a short story, but with a short story, I'm like, beat, let's go. You know, I just get started as quickly as possible. So for me, it's like a delay in start time. Novella, I can outline and then get started a little bit faster. A novella, I have to sit there and really do a lot of planning and a lot of thinking through world building questions that might come up. I'm not someone who does like a lot of deep, like, you know, those people who have like encyclopedia entries, like sitting in there scraping or whatever. I'm not one of those people. So only do as much planning as I need to get started, really. But a novella is like the nice sweet spot. It's like I have to think some things through, so I do know where I'm going. I don't have to feel it out quite as much as I do with a short story. P.S. I don't like love writing short stories, so I love the planning part. But the novella, I can kind of get going and get that momentum faster.
Well, I am a pantser, and I never outline if I can possibly avoid it, except times when, like, I'm doing, group writing, collaborative writing. Then I've done it, and then I'm like, oh wow, this is like, it writes so fast now that I have an outline, but I still won't do it when I'm writing by myself. So I tend to kind of write the early things achronologically, where I just have ideas about the characters or the setting and things that happen, and I just kind of throw them on without knowing how they fit together or what the plot will be. And at some point when I feel like I have critical mass, I start pulling it into a plot-ish order, and thinking about like what shape I want, you know, like at this point, do I want more action? Do I want intrigue? I love the word intrigue because it sounds so cool. And yet when you're like, oh, I'm going to write some intrigue, I don't know what it is, but it's still really good when you see it on a description. Like I want to read books with intrigue. So, you know, I do this kind of this. First, it's an accretive process where I just have more and more until I feel like I understand the world and the characters. And that makes it easier for me to let them drive the plot once I start plotting. So I do it the same way with novels and novellas. You know, as I said, I think having that image in my head of this is going to be a bit tighter and a bit more self-contained was what kept it like that to a certain extent. So, but yeah, basically same process.
Malka, what must the inside of your brain be like? I have no idea.
No, but I usually find out at 2 a.m.
I'm kind of the same in a lot of ways. I'm a pantser, but I don't write out of order. I write chronologically, except if I get stuck at a point, I'll jump ahead a little bit and to the next part I know, and then that usually tells me pretty quickly what should be between those two. I can't outline. I can. The only time I've done outlines is for media tie-ins when they required that. I never was able to follow them. Because I can't, especially for the action, adventure, science fiction, and fantasy was what I write. I can't figure out if a set piece action scene is going to work until I start trying to write it, because I figured that out with the media tie-ins, where I would have this bit in the outline, and I would sit down to write it, and then realize this is stupid. They're going to die if they do this. This doesn't work. And I just feel like the spontaneity I get, well, the two things is not knowing if something's going to work or not until I try to write it, and the spontaneity of how the characters feel about it as it's happening is what really, I think, fuels action scenes to make them, be exciting. So yeah, so my process for a novella is not really different than it is for a novel. Again, it's just the pacing and the length is what is the important thing for me. With Witch King, it was interesting because what I realized I was basically doing, or ended up doing, is writing two novellas and then braiding them together. And I think that's why the book went together so quickly for me, is because, again, it's cutting out the middle bits where neither novella has much of a middle. It's all the braiding together. It brings everything to the pacing in both sections. It makes it really tight. So yeah, that's just I just pantser, but almost 99% chronological.
I went to sorry.
No, go ahead.
I went to like a virtual talk with George Saunders a couple years ago. He wrote Lincoln in the Bardo, and he writes short stories mostly, including some novellas, which are very good. But anyway, he described writing Lincoln in the Bardo because he was like, I don't know how to write a novel. It's too long. I don't know. Like, it's like building a mansion, and all I know how to build is like a tent or like a yurt or something. So when he approached Lincoln in the Bardo, he was just like, I'm just going to write a series of yurts. I'm just going to string together a series of yurts. It's going to be a little camp of yurts. That's how I'm going to do it. And I really like that, because sometimes in a novel, like especially if it's really long, I think of it as like a series of novellas, just making sure that like, kind of like if you have parts in a novel, it's like each part has to have its own distinct like arc and purpose, and drive towards something. So I always liked that way of thinking about it. I just was thinking about it with Witch King, having to braid those two together, past and present.
Yeah, Saunders is just full of super cool wisdoms and sayings like that. Martha, you've talked about the middle bits a couple times, and I want to like visit that concept because it's fascinating. I think it's super relevant to novella, of especially eliminating the middle bits. I think all of us probably enjoy chunky novels. I mean, right? We're science fiction, fantasy people. It's kind of what we do, but there is some satisfaction not having the middle bits. And does anybody want to speak to, whether as a reader or as a writer, like, is it a different experience? Why? Where is the value in that? I mean, we in the genre, we prize that so much, these like sprawling things. Like, why are we also being satisfied by taking that out?
I think as a reader, that's some of my favorite part of the novel. I think especially about the Ben Aronovich Rivers of London series, where just the nitty gritty of all the world they're in and the interactions of the characters and stuff, that's usually when everything really starts to come together and be super interesting. So as a reader, I love the middle, especially of something like a mystery that's got a very, a mystery plot that is very intriguing. Against the intrigue, it's like, what is it? As a reader, you can point to it, but as a writer, it's kind of like, is this intrigue yet? I don't know. But as a writer, again, it's the most difficult part to write, because you have to keep the reader's interest and keep your own interest, which are kind of the same thing. If you're getting bored, then that's a good sign that something's wrong. But I think that I don't like them as much as a writer, because again, that's where I have to work the hardest. That's, I love writing, but sometimes it's really draining on your brain.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I also, like I said, I love reading long books. So I think I love reading the middle. because that's what most of the long book is. But I'm thinking now, like I'm thinking about, for example, Lord of the Rings, which I read over and over as a kid. And okay, technically it's like 3 books, and each book is actually separated into 2 books, right? I don't know if those come in on word count. But I'm thinking about, like, as a kid, very devoted to these books, and that section where they're freaking trekking through Mordor is always a slog. And I would always be like, ah, but it was still part of the experience of getting through the slog, which, you know, now when I go back and reread it, now I'm like, but why do I have to actually go through a slog? And then to contrast that, I'm rereading now one of my favorite books from when I was a kid, which is Watership Down. And I love it because, like, you have these amazing climactic set pieces, and then there's a whole nother like thing that happens, and you're like, thank goodness I don't have to say goodbye to these characters yet. There's still an exciting thing. And it is separated into parts as well, but each part is very dependent on the other. So I think there's a lot about how the things are structured, in terms of whether that middle part is really a middle part and whether it's enjoyable or not. But I also, when I think about the novellas that I love, so I'm going to again say Murderbot, sorry, Martha. The other one I want to bring up, because I don't think it gets talked about nearly enough, is Zen Cho's The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water, which is, it's amazing. And I hope lots of people will go out and buy it and read it. It's a great, like, wuxia fantasy. But, you know, both of these books, there's a lot of stuff that happens in the middle. Like, there's definitely no middle sag, but it's also not just beginning to end. There's definitely, like, plot points that occur and little mini episodes that occur in the middle. So, you know, I think I just feel like they're tighter than novels, but it's not that they're lacking a section. I think it's just, it is shorter and it's more direct, but they feel complete. You know, they don't feel like, oh, it's a short story where it gives us vibes. There's very much the plot going all the way through.
I think the middle sag in a lot of ways is for the writer, not the reader. If there's the reader should not notice that there's a sag, whether the structure, whatever kind of structure it is, if it's more conventional structure, if it's a structure that varies a lot. I think a lot of talk about the conventional novel structure sort of ignores how many classic novels like Watership Down, for example, do not follow that structure at all. Lord of the Rings certainly doesn't follow it. There's no reason why anybody today should follow it if that's not what lends itself best to the story. So yeah, the sag, I think, is in a book that's done well, is mostly the writer's sag in energy and just the general work of writing a long novel.
From a reader's perspective, I find that I can read novellas easier when I have a high stress load in my life. Like the center section of a book, I usually can't keep my mind focused enough because I have so many outside stuff going on. So when you have a shorter time frame, a crisper narrative, I can get through it easier. I can still do my reading, but it's not like we're walking with Lord of the Rings. You know, it doesn't lose me. Yeah, see? Yeah. I call it the we're walking section of the book.
I agree with you. During the pandemic, when I was we're still in the pandemic, but during lockdown, I was so stressed all the time that novellas were like the only thing I could bear. And short stories, because it was just like you could sit down for an hour and just let yourself focus for that long, and that was about as long as my attention span was. So I think that's huge, especially now. I don't know, it feels important now with various stresses.
I think you could do a whole panel on the effect of stress on reading for different people, their different conditions, because a lot of people couldn't read, during the pandemic. or again, yeah, it's still going on. But, during that first period of lockdown, before we had vaccines, where it was really, I think, the most stressful. It's different levels. It's different stressful now, but the most intense stressful. And I was reading, I was reading a lot still then, watching a lot of TV and reading. So it's weird how it affects different people. During probably the most stressful time I've had immediately during the past few years was when the power went out on our house during the winter down here. It was 16 degrees outside, and it was about, the house could not retain heat because it didn't have any insulation. So I took one of Nnedi Okorafor's books that I had on my phone, and now I can't pick it. It wasn't. I can't remember now what the title was, and just read, and that's all I did. While I was thinking of ways how not to get, for me and my husband, not to get hypothermia. And that was just like, that was my brain going like, I can't live in this environment all the time. I'm going to go live in this book. And the way some people can do that, and the fact that some people were denied that ability because their stress was so intense during that period of the pandemic. So it's probably a different topic, but that's an interesting topic in itself. But also with novellas, I think probably a lot of people got into novellas at that point because it was, you can finish this in 2 hours and it's going to take you away. And it's not like when your brain can't look at a big book and say, oh, I can't do that. That's too much time, blah, blah, blah. It's like you can look at the novella and go, yeah, I can finish that, this afternoon.
Yeah, there's such like a public conversation about like the attention economy and like attention as a currency. And I think that's an interesting way to think about it too. Not just that like books are competing with Netflix or kids are on TikTok or whatever, but yeah, like the attention of life and how much that demands and how much that affords you to like pay attention to a text in any way. Yeah, I can't read novels while writing a novel, but I can read novellas while writing a novel. The novella feels like, yeah, I just step away for a bit, read it, and I come back, but I can't like live and fully inhabit two worlds, which is like the fun thing about a novel, is to really live in it for a while. So. Okay.
Martha, I had a similar situation, but I was up in Portland and it was during the wildfires in Portland. And so there was no power, and we had to shelter in place with tape on all the windows and doors and stuff. And we didn't have any internet. So it was just me huddled on the floor, reading short books to myself and my daughter, trying to get through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's tough.
And it's one thing that when people I see devalue escapism and that kind of thing. And whether it's books or TVs or something, on TV shows, movies, there's so many people, and I was one particular growing up, this kind of thing saved my life. It's just like being able to remove yourself temporarily from reality. It's like it's undervalued, I think. And it's like, I feel like it's not really studied enough what the benefit of it is to you, even though so many people instinctively know that.
Yeah, I think there's just I mean, especially when you're so stressed you can't sleep, right?
Yeah.
But there's even, I mean, sleep obviously is super important, but I think there's also kind of rest that your brain does when you're not sleeping, right? There was a study recently, and then I saw something that maybe it had been debunked, or maybe it wasn't. I don't know. Who knows what is true now that the internet has been shitified, et cetera, et cetera. But okay, there was this thing going around about how playing Tetris immediately after a traumatic thing would help you from getting the traumatic replays. And like I said, it might have been debunked. I don't know, but I buy it because I've always done word games or something or matching games or something when I felt stressed and I needed, and it's like there's some part of your brain that's working on it, but it's not the part that's stressed, or maybe your brain can't do both at the same time or whatever. So, I think that we do really devalue. I mean, obviously, as a society, we devalue rest all over the place, but especially these sort of things that are like you're working but not productively. You're using your brain but not for production. And I think they're so important, like the reading and these kinds of puzzles and different kinds of thinking. And we should value them. And I will also say too, though, like for me, there are different kinds of escapist media, right? There's some kinds where you're watching it and you're like, this is really crap, but it's okay. It's making me feel fine for a little bit. That's okay. But I don't want to watch those like all the time. And then there's sorry, Martha, something like Murderbot, which I'm just going to tell the chat, enshittified is not my word. It's Cory Doctorow's, and
it's the best word.
It's everywhere.
It's like
it's been now recognized by, I don't know, someone declared it the word of the year. It's really useful. And he also has like a very cogent description and definition for exactly what it means in terms of our particularly internet, but broader capitalist ecosystem. So look it up if you like it, you'll learn more. But what I was saying is, works like Murderbot, or there are others. When I was working on my novella, I wrote a whole blog post for Tor.com about comfort reads and why I think they're important. And not only did I put mine on there, but the comments are full of other people's comfort reads. So like, look it up. This is also very useful. But there's like, Murderbot is not, everything's fine. We're having a happy rom-com with, people who have no problems in huge apartments in Manhattan. And it's there are a lot of problems, but it's very much about resistance, and it's about the value of media and escapism. And it's about, a lot of things that help you then, after you escape, go back and feel like, yeah, I can connect with people in my life. Yeah, I can go back and do the things I need to do. So I'll put that in the chat. So yeah, I think these are really important things.
I wonder if that's why Legends and Lattes got so big so quickly. Because it's short and it's like a hug in a book. And if you have a lot of people that are dealing with trauma from all different directions, they can't find housing, their jobs are up in the air, well, you can get a little hug in a book. And it's bite size.
Yeah, I've noticed that too, is sometimes I love adventure and I love mysteries and I love the high action stuff, but I also sometimes just want something where things just don't go that wrong. It's kind of like the Great British Baking Show thing where the drama we want is, will the souffle rise or not? You just want some drama with very low consequence drama, and that it makes a good, that's not what I want. Again, it's like, that's not what I want all the time, but it's like, it does make a good break. And sometimes that's just what you're in the mood for.
Yeah.
Along those lines, that's a great segue. Speaking of novellas that we like, specifically, what is a novella that blew your mind? And I'll just say that the first time I read The Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang, that really almost literally rewired my brain the way that happens in the story. If you haven't read it or seen Arrival, it was amazing. It blew my mind. And also Murderbot. I wanted to share that. But for everyone else, yeah, what was a novella that really surprised you?
I can go. I think it was the first Tor.com novella, The Sorcerer of the Wild Deeps by Kai Shanti Wilson. That blew my mind. Just his command of language and the way he used the way the characters spoke to each other in different ways. And it just was like, it just in that encapsulated world building where, yeah, it's a novella, but I feel like there's a gigantic world out there that he's referencing and a history that he's referencing. And so, yeah, that just absolutely blew me away. I thought that was a fantastic book.
It's not sci-fi or anything, but the first novella that blew my mind was Chronicle of a Death Foretold by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I was a teenager. I didn't know novellas existed, and this one, if you haven't read it, it's like all about a death, but it goes into like a bunch of different, like, I don't know, everything that's explored in it is about this death, but it just builds like an entire town around it, which is just crazy and kind of blew my mind because I just didn't know that like books did that, yet, because I was 16. And it was just super exciting the first time I was even exposed to novellas. Yeah.
Oh, for me, if we're talking about the first ones, it was Animal Farm for me and Old Man in the Sea. So, I was impressionable. I was I think it was a freshman in high school, in English, and you're being introduced to the concept of a novella. And then from there, I started reading a lot of Stephen King, and Stephen King's, the Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, The Body, Apt Pupil. I love his novellas. I think his novellas are very, very effective. Eye of the Werewolf, I think, is another one of his novellas. And then I also, around that time, read Candide, which taught me, you can have humor, you can have the ridiculous, and it can still be an effective story, an effective idea. So those were my first introductions. And Flowers for Algernon, which is like a beat down of a book. Like, in case nobody's read it, it just beats you down. Yeah. Anyone else?
Okay, yeah, we can hop on to the next question. So, this is a good one. And I'm gonna challenge everyone to say Murderbot less than 3 times in answering this question. But why do you think there's been such a surge, or do you think there's been a surge? I know there's some like argument that like the novella is kind of the traditional form of science fiction and fantasy, so it's not a resurgence. But like, if you think there's a resurgence, why do you think that is, and where do you see the novella as a form going in the immediate future?
I can talk about that. I think there has been a resurgence, but I think it was mostly market driven because novellas used to be a main form. Short novellas were a main form of science fiction and fantasy back in the pulp days, and up through I'm not 70s, something like that. The problems came when magazines started. There are basically fewer outlets for novellas because magazines were only taking one novella, maybe. They mostly wanted short stories. And so it's just the market for novellas had kind of gone downhill. And then when we start having ebooks, a lot of authors started writing novellas and self-publishing their ebooks. And so that's when publishers picked them up again. And so I think it's always been a popular form, but people just haven't had access to them. And particularly when they came back in ebooks, we're starting, and then we have Tor.com's novella line and Neon Hemlock and all these other publishers. So I think now the new readers are starting to find them again. But it's sort of like yes to both questions. It's always been a popular form in science fiction, but it hasn't been a form that people were able to get again regularly on demand, basically, until ebooks came in.
I do think it's like it's been kind of an awareness of what the term even means question, because when I was trying to remind myself of all the novellas I've read in preparation for this panel, and looking back, I was like, oh, I read so many but didn't know that that's what they were called. And when I was just starting out in YA, when we were having our big like dystopian moment, authors started writing novellas almost like between books as a promotional tool, and trying to then YA readers what novellas were was a little bit like, oh, you have to do it. You can't just use the term. Like you have to tell them this is going to be a short novel. And now I am, still talking to like teen readers a lot, and they seem more aware of what that means. or they remember, that's what that means. And in general, like in the readership, there's a kind of awareness of what novellas are and what to expect from them, which really helps with the reader satisfaction. Like I don't know if it was before we went live, but or if it was on the panel, but if you talk about like the way people review novellas, it's frequently like, wait, what? That's it? So there's like a frustration. You almost have to know what a novella is in order to like enjoy reading one, because you have like expectations of how long it's going to take and how involved it's going to be. So I do think that's improving over time and has gotten, obviously they've existed for a long time, but I think, marketing wise, it's definitely changed.
Yeah, I think there was a long period where people expected novels to be short. Which really look at older books, and now it's like people got into a period but expect them to be long, and so it's had to teach people that short novels and novellas, not under that name, have always existed. I still get yelled at in email a lot because the Murderbot novellas are short, and it's like they're 30,000 words about that's a novella. So there's still people who don't quite understand what they're reading.
Okay. I also think it's interesting to consider, like, I don't know, and I know this is not a new influence, but the whole awards category thing and how that affects things, because like I said, my sequels are creeping up. So, the first book is like 38,000 or something, and the second one is probably like 42. And they're not that different, as they're both kind of the same feel, but they're technically different. And, as a sociologist, someone's kind of interested in how the way we name things or categorize them or measure them makes them different. And so it's interesting also to think about that as one of the influences.
Yeah, that happened with me with Ring Shout. Ring Shout was about to come out, but The Master of Djinn, my first novel, hadn't come out. But I was informed by my editor, they said, Ring Shout is like 45,000 words. And if so, it'll be seen as your first novel by the awards people. So then I had to sit down and cut with a scalpel, basically 5,000 words. And I got it down. It took like 8 tries. And I finally got it down, I think, to 39,996 to be exact. So it could enter the novella category. And so it also wouldn't be mistaken for a novel. And I'm like, who reads a 41,000 word novel? I don't even know who does that. I think, like Veronica was saying, it turned out a lot when I was younger, when I read books like that a lot of times, I didn't know they were called novellas. I was reading Kafka's Metamorphoses. I didn't know it was a novella. I didn't know H.G. Wells works with novellas, but they were. A Christmas Carol is a novella, right? And so the term wasn't there. And so I was never thinking of that. But now for awards and those kinds of things, you have to think about it. Now my last one, Dead Cattails, is like 50,000. I could care less. I'm like, great. I get to avoid all awards things, period. Because now I'm not even concerned anymore about keeping it that 40,000. But it's interesting. I wonder how many people's stories, I don't know, maybe somebody is writing a 41,000 word novel and then they end up having to chop it down to go into novella category. But yeah, we are. The market, I think, as Martha was saying, I think we're driven by the market, things people want. I think shorter attention spans, people wanting quicker things goes into this, why novellas are so popular. And also the very idea that there are these things called novellas now. So people could say, I read a novella, right? And which novellas do you read? And, to make it sound like it's a new thing, when I think as Beth and Veronica pointed out, they're not new at all, right? They're very old. Moses pointed out as well. This is a old genre that's kind of returning, which is great for me because for a long time I had nowhere to put these things. Like I always say, the Black God's Drums was written years before it was ever published because it was just sitting on a hard drive somewhere until Tor came along and said, hey, we have this novella program, do you have anything? And I was like, well, do I? Quite a bit.
Don't mind if I do.
So I'm happy that we're going through this. My question is, you said, like, where is this going? Is it going to last? I never think anything is going to last. right? I would say I came out of hip hop where every genre of hip hop I thought, oh, this political hip hop is going to last forever, or this type, and then it always changes, and then I never know what the next thing is. So I don't know. Novellas were once big, and they weren't. Now they are, and so much of it has to do with marketing and getting out these books earlier. Some people using it as a way in between their novels, as Veronica was talking about, and I don't know if they'll be. I don't know if we've like hit the climax of novella resurgence, and then a panel 10 years from now will go like, whatever happened to novellas? That'll be the panel. So I don't know.
I don't know. I think that there's always going to be readers like me who, under a lot of stress, want a tight little book to read. I don't think that's going to go away. And, I agree with Martha entirely. I think that now it's access, because you have the library and you have brick and mortar stores, but you also have like Everand and, all of Amazon, the Amazon empire, and, ebooks directly to your Kindle or whatever. So you have much, much greater access for stuff. So I think it could only get bigger, at least in my opinion.
Malka mentioned categories, and that was one of my big nemesises for a long time, because in the 90s, I think it was more in the 90s, there was this urge to categorize the depth of everything. It was just, we were doing panels on the difference between high fantasy and low fantasy and epic fantasy and noble fantasy. And, and it's like, what does this even mean? And I really love the fact that fantasy has lost a lot of that, because they're the best books I see coming out now, and there's so many good books have come out in the last 10 or 15 years. It's just mind-blowing, particularly in fantasy. These books would completely defy that kind of characterization, like N.K. Jemison's I apologize, I can't remember names of anything, but it's the first trilogy that got really big.
Binti?
Yeah.
The Broken Earth.
Broken Earth.
Broken Earth. Oh, thank you. And that is epic fantasy. Obviously, now we look at it, and back then it would have never hit that characterization or that categorization, because it was, the shading into a little bit of science fiction, the crossing genres like that. Just people can do that because marketing wanted it to be in these incredibly narrow categories. And so I think that's another thing that novellas help with, is that novellas get categorized as novellas. There's not this big divide of what they have to be. You're not being forced into that. The thing you are being forced into because of the awards is, like you said, the size. For System Collapse was originally supposed to be a novella, and I'm working on it and realized, like, I'm at 40,000 words now, and we're not near the end. But then it ended up like around 65,000 words, which is it was kind of short for a novel that's not middle grade or so, so, but I was just like, I don't care, I'm not gonna let it be on a ballot, so I'm not worried about that. And that really is freeing for you. And then started realizing I can just write a book of whatever length I want, that again, it sort of feels like breaking out of that category where I don't have to narrow my idea down to fit into these tiny little boxes.
One thing we didn't really get into in our discussions of like writing them or whatever earlier is that novella is a space where you can get weird. Like, I wouldn't say I've done that particularly, but I've read some weird ones. Like last year I read Ubik by Philip K. Dick, and I don't think you can write a novel. It's such a weird, trippy, confusing experience reading that it's pretty much has to be that length, because it's sort of experimental in some ways. And there's a few others I've read like that where you're just like, this can only be this long. And that's like one of the exciting things about the space, is that like I will go with you on your weirdo adventure for 25,000 words. Like that's maybe the max of my like confusion patience. But I really love that about it too.
I think do androids Dream of Electric Sheep is also a novella.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is plenty weird. Plenty weird.
Yeah, I agree with Martha too, that, you know, I feel like I get worried when I see people talking about, you know, they'll be asking questions about, you know, I'm going to query my debut and it's a epic fantasy YA. And so how many words should it be? And how long is too long? And I'm kind of like, ugh, but I also am not the person who's going to be greenlighting something. So I never want to say like, write whatever you want. Cause I have no control over whether it's going to get published or not. And I guess these things matter somewhat, especially, I think, you know, too, especially for debuts and people who don't already have some kind of foothold, but it's a shame. It's a shame. And I wish publishing was not like that, either with these categorizations or these word counts, because, you know, we should have a lot more flexibility. And you know, so Infomocracy came out from Tor.com, like right when they were starting their novella program. It was the novel that came out next to them. And so they sent me all the novellas for that first round. And like, it was, you know, the weirdness, but also like, you can just sample all these different things. And you know, that first round, it had Shauna Maguire's first Wayward Children. It had, I think there was an Adrian Tchaikovsky. There was a Paul Cornell. There was Murderbot. But you told me not to say that again. So it was the Sorcerer of the Wild Leaves, which, yeah, I agree, is absolutely mind-blowingly good, and everyone should read it. And also A Taste of Honey, which I think is also a novella, yeah. And so, but it was just like, and you know, some of them I liked, some of them I loved, some of them I was like, but it wasn't a huge commitment for any of them. And it was a wonderful, just like sampler platter of amazing authors, and genres and like approaches and different things. So I think that is also really, really fun. And there were definitely things in there that gave you that epic fantasy feel. Well, The Sorcerer of the Wild Deeps. And there were things in there that gave you the like, so I don't even know the words, I don't care, but the like sort of closer, low-key small fantasy. And there was sci-fi, and there was just, you know, alt portals with shamans. And so it was, you know, just amazing stuff that comes in that size range. It can be anything. And so the bigger ones can also be anything.
Like Nino Cipri, I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce his name, Finna.
Yeah.
It's a portal story set in a big box store.
Yeah, Finna's pretty cool.
That's just, yeah. And Nevo, The Empress and Salt and Fortune just blew me away so much. It's like an entire 10-volume epic fantasy in novella form. And it just works so perfectly.
Yeah. All right. It's time for the game segment of our panel. Yeah, I didn't check if profanity is allowed. It probably is, but we're going to play it clean. We're going to play a game of Bed, Wed, Behead. For those who are unfamiliar with that, it's also known as FMK or F, Marry, Kill. But we're going to do it with novels, novellas, and short stories. And you can define this however you want. I think some of you were thinking like a specific text, you want to call one out, or you're thinking of the genres as a whole. Like that's up to you. But which one would you bed? Which one would you wed? And which one would you behead if you had to?
This is easy. Bed novellas, wed novels, and behead short stories.
Yeah, I'm the same. Short stories, like that's it feels like training for some like athletic activity to me. Like you do it because, like, for me, it flexes muscles that I don't use that often, and it like teaches me things, which is why I'm like, ugh. So exhausting. Hate to learn. I mean, not really, but anyway, I would behead them. I'm so sorry. I love them, but they have to die.
I'm the same. Novels are still my favorite. Short stories. The last short story I wrote, I did anything with, took me a year to write. It's just not my format.
I completely misunderstood this question. I picked, one to bed, one to behead.
Oh, well, tell us then.
All right. Let's see. Okay. Not to embarrass Mr. Clark, but I would bed ring shout. I would say that's probably one of my favorite novellas that I've ever read, by far. I thought it was incredible. Sorry, don't mean to embarrass Mr. Clark. Let's see, and then wed, I would do Those Who Walk Away from Omelas. Does anybody know that short story? Sure. I think I could spend a lifetime going over the philosophical questions that were asked in this short story and still have no idea, right or wrong. So, its ability to do that is pretty incredible. And then behead, Twilight. Did she say Twilight? No, it's a novel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, one of them is novella. One of them is.
Oh yeah, there's that other one.
Yeah.
Do you have to behead it with like a silver? So will that kill it? I'm just wondering.
You have to behead it and then burn the pieces.
Yeah, I chucked it across the room. It's about as I'm gonna have the Twilight stands coming after me. Sorry, everybody.
I think you're okay.
Fenderson, did you?
Oh, yeah.
Reveal which ones you'll behead?
I don't think I want to behead anything, but but yeah, I suppose it would have to be the order of, I can't remember what it was, but the one that I least enjoy doing are definitely short stories. Only because I think a lot of us in here probably is just not what we naturally write. There's some people they've written like 200 short stories, and I'm like, yeah, if I crack 20, that would be great. And so yeah, short stories. I don't hate it enough to want to behead it, but it is a challenge to write a short story. Though, I would say like sometimes you just know something's going to be a short story. Just like sometimes something's going to be a novella, right? I always say my novellas are for novels that I don't want to write. The story is good enough for this novella. Please don't ask me to write it into a novel. I don't want to write it as a novel. I just want to do this short story and move it along. I don't want to do the novel thing where I have to go to their apartment or their house and meet the family. And I just want to do the short, quick thing. But so, novellas probably are still what I like the most. I like novels, of course. But yeah, short stories give me the hardest time to write.
I believe the chat has requested that Moses answer this question.
Oh,
Yes.
well, this is a democracy. I'll bow to the whims of the chat. I think for me, I would wed novella. I took this literally in the sense of like, if I had to live the rest of my life writing one of them, it would be novellas, I think. It's just, yeah, my brain is good at storing like 60 to like 120 pages of text. And beyond that, now I just need to start it's a whole process to write a novel. But I do like novels, but I would just bed them briefly. And then, behead short stories, which is weird. I think most people would assume that a bunch of novella writers would also like short stories. Like we just want shorter forms, but we've all chosen to behead them, which is surprising.
You feel like novellas what happens when people who write long try to write short stories, because
Absolutely.
that's my theory.
Yeah, I mean, there are short stories that I love, and there are a couple of short stories I've written that wrote easily, but I don't want to behead them because I actually get a decent amount of income from commissioned short stories for various things. But it's always like, oh, they want me to write a short story. Oh gosh, I have to come up with like an ending within 5,000 or sometimes 3,000 words. Like I have to make it actually feel complete in that short time, and for me too, I think what's fun for me is always, as we said, the world building and the characters and like digging in and then thinking of more details and adding them and thinking of more details and adding them. This is why I revise long, and thinking like, oh, this world would definitely have whatever. Yay. And yeah, so that's why I'm going long.
Sweetheart.
We all just stopped talking just to.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move into. We have time, but I want to move into recommendations. So, first of all, I will say, because I know we're writers and a lot of us are bad at this. First, shout out your own work, whatever you have coming up, whatever you just released. All of us have something, or just novellas that you think everyone should read that you highly recommend.
You should go first. Tell us about yours.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. So I have a book coming out March 5th. It's called The Truth of the Aleke. It's the sequel to The Lies of the Ajungo. Takes place 500 years after the events of the first book, which I thought was like a really smart writing decision because I thought it'd be easy to, just like it's a whole new thing, whatever. It was very hard. I had to, you have to establish new characters, new conflict. It was a poorly thought out plan, but I think it turned out very well, and I'm very excited for the book. And so that comes out March 5th. And a novella that I think everyone should read. I mean, all of yours, everyone on the panel, you'll get to describe your own. But I did mention earlier The Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang. I think it's yeah, go read it. It's an incredible experience. I'm gonna fire back at you, Veronica. Your turn.
All right. Well, the one I have coming out in May is When Among Crows, and it's like set in Chicago, which has a lot of Polish people in it. I know because I'm one of them. And my grandfather was always really excited about us moving to Chicago. But anyway, and it's basically proposes that there's like a creature underworld in Chicago, and it's like a Wizard of Oz style story where over the course of one day, this group of people tries to find Baba Yaga instead of the wizard, for various reasons, some of which are secret and dangerous. So that comes out in May. And for what I would recommend, oh my God, I've read so many good ones. I don't think we've talked about this yet, but The Past is Red by Catherine Valenti I really liked. If you are just new to novellas, you've got to read This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal Al-Motar and Max Gladstone. And then there's another Ted Chiang one that I really liked and wrote on my little list, which I'm looking at right now, called Anxiety is the Dizziness of Freedom, which I thought was pretty great. He's obviously, I mean, you want to talk about beheading short stories, I would like to never behead Ted Chiang, but yeah.
Let's see. The only thing I have coming out is the author's preferred edition of Element of Fire and Death of the Necromancer, which are coming out from Tor.com as the Book of Ile-Rien on February 27th. That's all I have coming out. I'm behind because I had a lot of big medical stuff year that I'm very behind on everything. Favorite novellas, I mean, there's a lot, like anything by Nevo. And I love her. She's got a couple of really brilliant short novels too, that are a little bit longer than novellas, like Siren Queen and The Chosen the Beautiful. But she's got the whole fantasy novella series that starts with The Empress of Salt and Fortune that I absolutely loved. Kate Elliott, The Keeper's Six, was a recent novella. It was a kind of a portal fantasy, but that's not all it is. That's another one where it's like, I would have loved a whole book of this, but what you get is just right. God, there's so many. The Malka already mentioned the Order of the Pure Moon, yeah, I kind of lost the title. This happens to you when you go through radiation treatment, by the way. The Zencho, I love all her writing, but that's a particularly good novella. And again, and everybody here, basically, The Lies of the Ajungo, I loved it. I can't wait for the sequel. Fenderson's The Black God's Drums, the tramcar one. Just I've read all those. I really love them. And Malka's Mimicking of Known Successes. I can't wait for the sequel. And then Veronica's. Yeah, this is a great. I think this has been a great novella panel because all my favorites are on it. So.
Oh, I think it's my turn. Dead Cat Assassins, which is coming out sometime in 2024, is the next novella I have coming out. And it's fun because I get to return to fantasy. I get to write a story that doesn't have deep meanings, no meaning. It's just a fun story. It's John Wick meets Dungeons and Dragons. And it's just a fun, fast, accelerated fantasy about an undead assassin who is put on an impossible job. And after that, I have novellas. I have one novella that I'm still working on. I call it my novella when I'm tired of writing other things. I'm going to work on this for fun because it's not sold to anybody. It's just sitting there. So I have that, and I actually have another idea for a novella, which I've jotted down notes for. So there are more novellas coming, hopefully, provided I can get them sold. Oh, and as far as favorite novella thing, everybody here has named many of the ones. We did Kai Shanti's, Wilson's, which was great. We've talked about the Time War. I think everybody's named everything. Victor LaValle's Battle of Black Tom, Cassandra Call's Hammers on Bone. I think those were some of my favorite that I can think of. But there's just a lot. I think we live in an era where there are a lot of new novellas rather than the older, more classical ones. But we live in this resurgence where we have a lot of these. So that's good.
I guess I'll go. We just released our quarterly January edition of Grimdark magazine. Turned out pretty good. And then we have another issue coming up in April that's going to be entirely focused on South Asian writers. So I'm really looking forward to putting that together. As far as, we mentioned a lot of the ones that I had written, but Upright Women Wanted is really great. Murderbot, of course. Any of the Wayward Children series by Shauna McGuire. To Be Taught If Fortunate. And I don't know if has anybody read Vigilance by Robert Jackson Bennett? Has anybody read? It's about media's control of shooting, school shootings become a commodity for media, and it's amazing, and it really resonated with me as somebody from Las Vegas. With the big shooting that happened here. We just had another shooting at UNLV. Who my sister was at it in, So I think that's a book that's kind of under the radar because a lot of people focus on his longer novels, but it's quite good and short. Definitely worth checking out.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we named all of the novellas that exist. Read all of them, honestly. Anybody who isn't already reading them, please do. I'll also give a shout out to a novella coming out this year by Toby Ogundiran called In the Shadow of the Fall. It's coming out from Tor.com. It's fantastic. Keep an eye out for that. I think we are at the audience Q&A section. So I'm going to scroll back up to the top of the chat. I know they've been coming in. And we'll try to get to as many as we can. We have a decent amount of time. So let's see. Those of you who put panel question before your comment, thank you. That helps find it. And yet I'm still struggling to find it.
There was one earlier. I don't want to. Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay, I found it here. Yeah.
You got it.
Yeah, if they're serialized novellas, what's an acceptable gap in the stories? How much can happen that affects storyline without being covered in a novella? That's a good question. I mean, I took 500 years between mine, so, I have no limits on this, I guess, but anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can do whatever you want as long as you can do it. It really depends what you're trying to approach. With my novel series, I purposely put 2 or 3 years in between each one because I wanted that gap. My novellas series now, they're set a little bit closer together, but that has more to do with what's going on in the story than the length. I think, being open to going to 500 years or more. I mean, what was the Seven Eves, the Neil Stevenson chunk, but kind of like a slightly lesser chunk plus a novella, actually. And there was what, 5,000 years in between the two, which were all part of one chunk. But yeah, so yeah, just do what you need to do. I mean, I think if you're missing parts of the story, then that's a different problem than the amount of time. And there's so many ways to deal with that, with like time capsules that people dig up, or flashbacks, although I hate flashbacks, but that's just me. Lots of people love them. Or like there's lots you can do. So go wild.
All right, so for the next one, is there such a thing as a novella one can savor or ought to and read slowly?
This is the one I was going to bring up because I was like, we got to answer this. I really like this question. But I do think This Is How You Lose the Time War is one of those. Like, I didn't power through that one because it's just a series of letters, you know? And me not powering through is not a reflection of its quality. It was just that it was nice to kind of like sit with it over a while and get to know the characters as they wrote to each other. So I like that one for this.
Emily Tish's novels, The Silver in the Wood and Drowned Country, are, the language that she uses is beautiful. And you can just read it slowly and sip at it like a fine wine. It's that kind of language, and you can enjoy going through. You don't have to, there's no speed involved in that book. It's just lingers. Yeah. Getting a yes, Beth.
I would say that for Shanti Wilson's too. Like the language is so amazing and layered, and like the world building is just so, yeah. Those are just, they're incredible.
The Annual Migration of Clouds too is like that, I think. Premi Muhammad. It's not a fast-paced book, but she does great things with language. You can just enjoy the experience of reading it.
Yeah, I'll second Shanti Wilson's both novellas. Yeah, they are to be savored. I think they're designed that way. Looks like we have another question. I hope I didn't miss one, but would you say you find yourself pulling from different story structures or storytelling traditions for novellas than you would for a novel?
I did write Arch-Conspirator is a retelling of a play. So I think one of the it was an easier way for me to wrap my head around how to write a novella, because a play of that length feels like the correct length for a novella. And I would say that helped me a lot. It was like I sat down and outlined the play. I read 3 different translations of it or whatever, and then I outlined it. And then like pulled the structure of the novella from that. And obviously like it deviates a little and it adds in some things to it because I can. But I think that was part of the exciting thing about writing it was getting to like make use of an existing structure and see how it would translate to novella form and what it would lose and what it would gain through that adaptation.
Fenderson, I especially want to get your thoughts on. I know you're a student of history and you really work different historical episodes and moments and traditions into your work. Is this question, how does it apply to your work?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I pull from different story structures than I would for a novel. I think the most I can say about writing novellas, I'm probably a bit more daring in writing novellas, probably because I know I just have to sustain this crazy idea for 30, 40,000 words or so, and I don't have to sustain it over an entire novel where people are expecting a bit more So I think something like Ring Shout, for instance, I could not see myself writing Ring Shout as a novel. The idea was harebrained when I thought it up. I was like, this is all weird. It's this mashup of different things. So I don't know if it's so much that I wouldn't do that it's not pulling from different story structures or storytelling traditions as I would for a novel, because a novel, I think I would pull from anything, but and I'm not a fan of staying in one genre. I will certainly slip the streams. I think it's more so that for novellas, I'm probably going to use novellas for my ideas that I think are a bit more out there. And again, a lot of that is simply, if I were to do this as a novel, can I sustain this for an entire novel? I don't know. But I think I can get through a novella with this. I think readers will stay with me for a novella with this.
I like when you have a thing where you're like, if this was any longer, I would have to explain how the world got to this state. But because it's this short, I'm like, sweet, I am not going to explain it.
Adrian Tchaikovsky has that a lot. Like, he has a whole bunch of really good novellas that are like that. You know, it's just crazy. The ideas are crazy, but he doesn't have to explain it because they're, you know, it just is.
For my novels and novellas, I'm a big structuralist. I think a lot about the structure of anything I'm writing. And so typically for novels, I use like a 4-act structure or variations of it. For novellas, it's much more, I'm much more tension driven. I try to find like a central tension and establish that as early as possible. And then because it's a novella, I can stretch that typically for a pretty good amount of time without, you know, a novel. I think sitting uncomfortably in a novel is crazy. It's just an uncomfortable experience. I think for a novella, because Veronica, as you were saying, it's like, it's an opportunity to get weird. And I think readers are a little more comfortable with it being weird, especially for a shorter duration. I try to like find some central question or image or moment that I can really make the reader, tense, and then stretch that for a while and go from there.
I like that.
I don't see any more questions. Do any of the panelists we have a couple more minutes. Anyone have anything they want to say or any question they have for another panelist? Oh, we just got a question. Okay. Are there any tropes you would like to see more of? Are there any you'd like to see disappear?
I feel like readers think more about tropes than we do. I always, whenever I'm asked about tropes, I'm like, all I can think of is a love triangle. That's the only one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Which, yes, I would like to come back. I'm ready.
Yeah, I think it's all in how the person does it. I mean, I don't really think of things as tropes. It's just, does this work in the story? So yeah, and then there's always some, no matter what you name the story element, there's always people who can make it, interesting, fascinating, exciting.
If Phrygian is a trope, I would like Phrygian to stop and go away forever.
Yeah.
Build your characters. Don't use someone else's pain or whatever to give them emotional depth or a motivation or anything. I don't know if that counts as a trope even, but like.
No, it's totally a trope.
It's a shortcut.
Yeah, it's totally a trope.
Okay.
The Refrigerator Diaries. There's a great one. There's a great novella that talks specifically about fridging. And it's fantastically done. And once you see it a lot. Yeah.
Well, I can't think of any tropes. Yeah, I don't think well in tropes, and I can't think of any. If anyone doesn't have any, if no one else has anything to add or discuss, I think we're done. We're at about time. So thank you to the panelists. This panel was the highlight of my week, month, year. It was amazing. You're all fantastic. And I hope the audience had a great time. Thank you all for coming and for your incredible questions. And enjoy the rest of TBRCon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, great to see you all.